The film begins with a little boy named Connor, peacefully sleeping in his house. Suddenly, he notices a massive tree outside, with a church standing on the other side of it. Out of nowhere, strong winds begin to blow. The church starts to crack and collapse, crumbling to the ground. Beside the church stands a woman who begins falling along with the debris. Connor rushes to her, grabs her hand, and tries desperately to save her, tears streaming down his face. But despite his efforts, he cannot hold on, and she falls. At that moment, Connor jolts awake, terrified. It was just a dream, yet it felt so real that he struggles to believe it wasn't. The morning arrives, and Connor gets ready for school. We learn that he lives with his sick mother, who is in very poor health. Because of this, Connor has to manage all the household chores. After finishing his tasks, he heads to school, where a bully frequently picks on him. Connor, as always, tries to ignore the bully and returns home. In the evening, Connor spends time with his mother, watching old movies on his grandfather's projector. One of the films features a man falling from a tower, which reminds Connor of his dream, the collapsing church and the falling woman. Inspired, he decides to sketch his dream on paper. As Connor focuses on his drawing, something extraordinary happens. The ground outside his house, near the large tree by the church, begins to split open. From beneath the earth, a giant monster emerges, tearing through the soil and moving toward Connor's house. At exactly 12:07 a.m., the monster appears at Connor's window and starts calling out to him. Terrified, Connor tries to hide, but the monster picks him up in its enormous hands and brings him closer. The monster tells Connor, "Don't be afraid of me. I want to be your friend and share stories with you." However, Connor refuses, saying, "You're a monster. I can't be your friend or listen to your stories." The monster, enraged, begins to glow a fiery orange, turning red with anger. It opens its massive mouth as if to devour Connor. But just as the monster is about to act, Connor suddenly finds himself back at his table, where he had been drawing moments earlier. He thinks this must be his imagination, but because he is so frightened, he goes to his mom and sleeps beside her. The next day, while Connor is on his way to school, his eyes fall on the same big tree. He stops and begins observing it very carefully, but soon continues on his way to school. When he returns home, he finds his grandmother there. However, he is not particularly happy to see her. His grandmother suggests he come and stay at her house, but Connor outright refuses, which leads to an argument between them. That night, Connor goes to bed. But once again, he dreams of the church collapsing. He wakes up terrified, and when he checks the time, it is still 12:07 a.m. At that moment, the monster emerges again from the ground near the tree and appears beside Connor. This time, the monster does not grab him roughly, but holds him gently in its arms. Instead of showing anger, the monster pleads with Connor, saying, "You don't have to be friends with me, but at least listen to my stories." This time, Connor agrees to listen. The monster begins to tell a story about a king, a queen, and their children. Many years ago, there was a king who lived with his queen and children in a grand palace. They led a luxurious and joyful life. But one day, some wicked people attacked the palace, and the queen and her children were killed. Only the king and one grandson survived. The king deeply loved his grandson and cared for him. Eventually, the king remarried, but the new queen turned out to be an evil, greedy, and cruel woman. She attempted to kill the king several times but failed. However, due to his old age, the king eventually passed away. After his death, the wicked queen seized control of the kingdom. She claimed that the young prince was too immature to rule, so she would manage the kingdom in his stead. The prince, angry and upset, left the palace and went to live in a nearby village. There, he revealed the truth about the evil queen to the villagers, telling them that she had usurped the throne, even though he was the rightful heir. The villagers sought the help of the monster, and together they attacked the queen and defeated her. The prince regained his rightful place as the ruler of the kingdom. And that's where the story ends, the monster concludes. After listening to the story, Connor asks the monster, "Who was the bad one in this story?" The monster simply replies, "There was no evil in it." A person becomes good or bad because of their actions. It is up to the individual to choose which path to take, one of goodness or one of evil. Connor tells the monster, "I don't want to live with my grandmother. What should I do? How do I escape from her?" The monster responds, "You don't have a problem with your grandmother. In fact, you need to escape from someone else." The monster's time is up, and he returns to the ground, leaving Connor at home. The next day, after returning from school, Connor finds his mother in very poor condition. She tells him, "My son, the treatment I'm receiving isn't working. I'll have to go to the hospital for a new treatment." Connor is deeply saddened by this. His mother then tells him, "Son, when I'm gone, you will have to live with your grandmother. And please don't cause her trouble. Just listen to everything she says." Connor agrees to his mother's wishes and prepares to live with his grandmother. The doorbell rings. When Connor opens the door, his father is standing there, and he is overjoyed to see him. They go to the park together. While eating, Connor tells his dad, "Dad, I want to live with you, not with my grandmother." His father replies, "Son, I want to keep you with me, but not right now. I wish I could take you, but things are difficult. For now, you'll have to stay with your grandmother." His father then leaves him at his grandmother's house, and Connor goes inside feeling sad. That night, exactly at 12:07 a.m., the monster returns to meet Connor and tells him another story. He says, "Many years ago, there was a father in a village. There's also a doctor who made medicines from herbs, curing any disease with his treatments. One day, the doctor went to a magical tree to gather herbs for his medicine. But the father also came to the tree and forbade the doctor from taking anything from it, so the doctor left empty-handed. One day, the father's two daughters fell terribly ill, and no treatment worked on them. The father, desperate, took them to the doctor and begged him, saying, 'Please help me. Make medicine from that tree for my children. Their disease isn't being cured by anything else.' But the doctor refused, saying, 'I can't help you. I am forbidden to take anything from the tree.' Because many people had died because of the father, the monster starts destroying the entire house of that father. Connor stands next to him, watching, and begins to break the house as well. But the next moment, Connor finds himself back inside his own house. He realizes that in his anger, he didn't destroy the father's house, but instead, he had broken everything in his grandfather's and grandmother's house. After a while, the grandmother comes home and sees the destruction. She is surprised but doesn't get angry with Connor. She doesn't punish him either because she understands that Connor is going through a very difficult time. She knows that his mother is suffering from a life-threatening disease and that she won't be around for much longer. The next day, Connor goes to visit his mother at the hospital. He finds that her condition has worsened even more. His mother tells him, "Son, this new treatment isn't working either," which deeply saddens Connor. Later that night, when the monster comes to meet him, Connor begs, "Please cure my mother." The monster replies, "I'm sorry, but I can't help you with this." Feeling heartbroken, Connor returns home. The next day, when Connor goes to school, the same bully who used to bother him tells him that he will no longer trouble him. But it's not because he has changed. It's because Connor hasn't been around much lately. Although Connor still attends school, he is rarely seen. In the afternoon, the monster appears at school, but only Connor can see him. The monster then tells him the story of an invisible man. The monster explains that the man was not invisible because he couldn't be seen, but because people ignored him and chose not to acknowledge his presence. Hearing this, Connor remembers the bully's words about not being seen at school. He realizes that the bully made him feel invisible. Filled with anger, Connor attacks the bully, using the help of the monster. He beats the bully so badly that he ends up in the hospital. After this incident, all the children at school begin to notice Connor. Connor runs to the tree, seeking out the monster. He calls out, "Come in front of me, help me cure my mother. I know you can do this." The next moment, the monster appears and tells Connor, "I came to cure you. I can't cure your mother." Hearing this, Connor becomes angry. The monster continues, "Everything I am doing is necessary for you. I can't do anything that will cure your mother." Connor begins to scream loudly, overwhelmed by his emotions. In response, the monster brings his dream to life. Strong winds start to blow, and Connor watches as the church begins to collapse. He sees the woman standing next to the church, slipping and falling, his mother. Connor runs toward her, grabs her hand, and tries to pull her up, but he cannot save her. This is the moment his mother died from slipping. Connor is filled with sadness and surprise. The The monster approaches him and says, "Connor, now you tell the next story." At first, Connor doesn't respond, staying silent. But when the monster begins to grow angry, Connor starts telling his story. He says, "I've always seen my mother in pain. I love her so much that I can't bear to see her suffer. I always prayed that her pain would lessen, hoping she would get better." The monster responds, "But you have to accept your mother's condition." Connor shakes his head, unable to accept it. "I can't do it," he says. "In every dream, I try to save her, and I'm sure her illness will be cured." The monster tells him, "But that's not the whole truth. You may pray for your mother and try to save her, but deep down, you're also tired of seeing her suffer. You're tired of taking care of her. That's why you often get angry at her. You want her pain to end, not so she stays alive, but so she can go to God, because you can't take care of her alone." Connor, crying, finally admits, "Yes, you're right. I've thought about this many times, but in reality, I never wanted to do this." The monster replies, "You will have to accept this bitter truth now. You keep stopping her from going, and you must let her go. This is why you're in the state you're in." Then, the meaning of the three stories becomes clear. In the first story, the prince, even though he was once bad, becomes a good king and takes care of his people. In the second story, the doctor, though greedy, helps people and turns out to be a much better person than the father. In the third story, the invisible man was alone, making everyone feel his presence. In this way, all three stories were connected to Connor. Then the monster tells Connor, "You have been running away from the truth so far, but after explaining everything, the difference is that you accept the truth so soon." With all this weighing on him, Connor becomes very upset. That's why he decides to sleep there that night. During the night, Connor's grandmother comes to the tree looking for him. Finding him asleep there, she wakes him up and takes him to the hospital, where their relationship starts to improve. Connor begins to get along with his grandmother. When they reach the hospital, Connor meets his mother for the last time. He says goodbye to her peacefully, after which she passes away. Days later, as things settle, his grandmother shows Connor his mother's old room, which she had now prepared for him. When Connor enters the room, he finds his mother's old diary, filled with drawings of all three stories. Furthermore, his mother had also drawn the monster. This reveals that when Connor was a small child, he too saw the monster, and it had sat on his shoulder. From this, we realize that the monster Connor had been seeing throughout the movie was just his imagination. It was his mind creating the monster, something that existed only in his thoughts, and no one else could see it because it wasn't part of the real world. The monster had entered his imagination and was trying to help him understand his mother's death so he could accept the bitter truth that she was going to leave him forever. That's why the monster had said, "I have come to cure you," because Connor could never imagine that his mother could leave him. He had only wished her pain would end, as he was exhausted. But the monster was helping him face the truth by showing him his mother's thoughts and dreams. Now that his mother had passed, Connor felt ashamed of himself, wondering why he had wished for her to go to God and why he had become tired of taking care of her. But the monster explains to him that it is the desire of every person that his pain should end, so you shouldn't be ashamed of it. With this, the film ends here.